What are we to do with Cambridge? Things have developed quite dramatically over the last few weeks. Some would say over the last 5 or 6 decades in the world of academia. From my experience, way back in the late 1970s, I saw the beginnings of what we have now. And it was spectacular. Strangely, about 2 weeks ago, I met someone who knew me well during those years at university, a chap called Conway. He came from Rhodesia, as it was then, and now Zimbabwe, and we got on very well, which confused those around him who thought that I must be a racist and all the horrors by definition. I tell you this story briefly because it sounds unbelievable, but the extent and appalling nature of academics' potential nature is quite frightening. To cut a long story short, at my university there were 2 factions in the philosophy department. One that seemed to back me and the other that, in the case of 2 academics, wished me dead. That's no exaggeration. But the latter faction was ideological. Strange mixture of Marxism and linguistic analysis stroke Wittgensteinianism. I won't bore you with the details of them now, but they go together rather well to effectively destroy the right of individual agency in human beings. And it is rather wonderful because both aspects of that extreme faction are adherents to closed system theories. Now, a closed system, an axiomatic one, is right by definition. So if you oppose it, you are by definition wrong, and if it's anything to do with politics and moral affairs, by definition you are subhuman and excrescence to be eliminated as a moral duty. I cannot tell you how extreme these people are. Suffice it to say that when the row broke out between the awkward little student who was trying to do philosophy, aka me, and this bunch, the 2 factions set on each other with unimaginable fury. All sorts of unpleasant things were happening. It was dark days. In the last 18 months of my stay at that place, no academic spoke to me one-to-one except once in the corridor, and no academic asked me for the slightest piece of work, and I was given 0 tuition. I attended all the lectures, of course. I think I was the best attendee. At the end of this, to, as it were, silence me, I was given the lowest 2nd class, I'm told, of all time at that institution. In one of my finals papers, they never normally published the marks as such. I was given 5%, and that was, ironically, in one of those thought to be good for you forays outside the department in the philosophy of education, the education department. And they took loathing to an even greater height. Well, they failed to destroy me, and here I am, after 40 years of good luck, which kept people from being unpleasant to me, and a certain degree of wealth. In the end, wealth isn't earned. It isn't stolen. It's luck gives it to you, combined obviously with work and effort on your part, to a greater or lesser extent. In my extent, I believe it was lesser. So these sort of podcasts I do are partly by way of repayment, which I owe to those who were kind to me and to the society that tolerated this almost ultimate example of a member of the awkward squad. So, Cambridge, what are we to do with it? It looks like that department that Ade came from, and other academics in that department, is irreparably poisoned. There comes a time in institutions and organisations, departments also, where things have got so far down the line that they're irredeemable, they cannot be repaired. It's the same as an old car. There's a certain point when you've thrown so much money at it, you've got to admit that even though it still has a good engine and might have many other good features, it's a goner. And so you have the ghastly business of driving it to the scrap heap, passing it over to the boss of the scrap company, and knowing it'll soon just be a bunch of metal crushed, with a few parts taken off by the likes of me scavenging for cheap spare parts for motor cars. I suppose that irony is even more painful. And then sometimes, going down there, you make the weak remark, yes, it's got a new battery on it, as if that'll make any difference. And it seems such a shame, because in many cases I've had cars that last for 80, 90, 100,000 miles and more. And you're just, after all that service, this lump of metal is just crushed. As if a car could have any consciousness to be thought worth worrying about or caring for. But we human beings are odd like that. And certainly the human beings in the Cambridge sociology department are distinctly odd and very dangerous. They, however, are nothing compared to the corporate culture and those fostering it at senior levels in Cambridge beyond those departments, the administrators, the people put in there to be the master of this, that, college or the other. They are effectively, certainly in the case of the sociology department, condoning destruction of the legacy society. Legacy intelligentsia, beware history and culture of this country. The idea is that if you get rid of all this, these oppressive aspects, suddenly everyone will be seen as the same, and we'll all sing Kumbaya and drink Coca-Cola to I'd like the world, teach the world to sing and all that sort of stuff. And politics, the need for politics, would evaporate. Justice, humanity and happiness would reign. Yeah, it is sort of kindergarten politics. No insult to children. Children have a right to have these sort of fantasies. And to strip them of them would be the most cruel thing. It's like telling a child there's no such person as Father Christmas. Or Mother Christmas, or whatever you want to call it. But fairies don't exist. It's unnecessary and stupid cruelty. It's an intellectual arrogance. As if these bright sparks were never children themselves. Cambridge University then has a problem on its hands. Because it has choices. The first choice is to just let things blow over. Let people blow off steam and people will forget. In this case they won't. Because the type of opinion, and it seems to be academically respectable opinion from that department, is viscerally, has a visceral dislike, borderline hatred of the society that put those academics there. It's quite frightening. There's one academic, for instance, and no names, no pack drill, but you can read the press quite quickly, who strongly believes that democracy, Western academic discipline, are not in agreement with her extreme ideological religious beliefs. This is really, really, really dangerous stuff. It's like stoking a religious war. We had a belly full of that in the, 16th, 17th, 18th centuries? We ended it. And here it is on our doorstep again. Thank you very much, those liberals who think that underneath everyone is the same. We are all humans. We share a humanity. I'm not arguing that. But what enables us to stick together is that word society and culture. You may not like it, but it's a truth and it's a fact. It gives us a trust. So, for instance, in the old days, maybe before the decline of our high trust society, if I broke down, shall we say, in Northumberland or somewhere like that, I could go into a house nearby and say, do you see it possible? Could you lend me some tools or something just so I can put the thing right so I can get home? Or do you know someone who does? And likely or not, that would work, and they would look at me and think, well, this person's in the same society as me, and well, it may be different. He may speak a weird southern accent or weird snobby accent, but, you know, yeah, we'll get on with that, oil the wheels. The sort of thing we would appreciate if we broke down in Surrey or somewhere, or, God forbid, Worcestershire or Herefordshire. And that would happen. There'd be lots of thanks, cups of tea, and offers of a little bit of money, and no refusal, no, it's lovely. Thank you. And we'll part the ways, and my motor car will start up, and I'll get home again. And I'll be very grateful. That would all evaporate if you took away society and shared culture and history. I would be considered sort of amoral, super selfish, just another creature on the universe, like a worm or a bat or a wolf. Why should I do anything for me? The farmer might come up with a shotgun and see me off instead. That's what happens when you start destroying society and destroying the bonds of humanity, because humanity itself we all have. All human beings do. But the bonds of humanity depend upon society, shared culture, and critically, when it comes to democracy, understanding that if you're going to get cooperation, which is possibly the key part and reason for society, if you're going to get cooperation, you must ensure that the cost of cooperation is always less than the cost of non-cooperation. Put it another way, the cost of compromise. Because in this, if you have a sort of organisation, there's bound to be times when the general decision goes against what you think should be right. It might be you've got a tax rise and they haven't for some reason or other. Now, a well-run system would cater for that. I think, okay, you disagree with us, and this will be mutually understood. It wouldn't be overt. Look here, if you don't cooperate and accept that occasionally it's a matter of sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, occasionally it goes against you, then we've got a problem. You're really not in our little tribal group or organisation. You can't be. Because what makes it possible is that there's obviously respect if you disagree, but what makes things work is that you benefit more by just putting up with something you dislike than by sticking your heels in and saying, I'm just not doing that. So that's a basic principle of all effective organisations. Now, of course, authoritarian systems are different, because it still depends upon that basic rule: the cost of compromise must be less than the cost of non-cooperation. But the authoritarian systems put that finger on the scales, like that, so that it radically increases the cost of non-cooperation. So in authoritarian systems, shall we say, you imagine yourself in late 1930s Germany, and you have strong Christian beliefs, and you really find the thought of sending your child to Hitler Youth a ghastly prospect. Because your child's a nice enough, beautiful thing, and you love him to bits, or her to bits. But she wouldn't be going to Hitler Youth, of course. She'd be going to the other one, being a female. You're very likely they're going to come back and start being rather unpleasant. But then you think, well, yeah, but if I refuse to send him to Hitler Youth, they're going to come down on us like a ton of bricks, and could well take the children off us. So you just accept, because the authoritarian finger has gone on the scales. You accept your child will have to be indoctrinated in the purest ideological horror that was dominated politics at the time. Something very similar happens in extreme socialist and communist systems. Very, very similar. Because essentially all ideological politics boils down to the same thing, as Orwell noted in the mouth of O'Brien as he tortured the wretched Winston at the end of 1984. Orwell's politics evolved. He was shocked when he saw the way the communists in Spain, Soviet-backed communists, happily executed those who weren't quite ideologically correct. And then, of course, that bullet put the cherry on the cake. He came back and he gradually began to change his views from socialism. He sort of flirted a little bit with sort of ethnic culture of conservatism, but not for long. In the end, after Animal Farm in 1984, he realised that left and right wing, rather creepily in agreement with Ayn Rand, who I don't like very much at all, were little more than gangs out, well, they were gangs, solely focused on pursuit of power. That's his words. Power is power. It's the words of his invented torturer at the end of 1984. I think, to a small way, Orwell was wrong. I think what he should have said is authority is authority. Because one of the great cultural blocks that the intelligentsia has, and it has a few, but this is a really big one, is they keep on spouting information is power, knowledge is power, this, that and the other is this, that and the other. It's so imprecise and sloppy. I mean, to an extent you might almost accuse them of weak-minded. Because you can know something, but if you can do nothing about it, you can know the secrets of the universe. You're as impotent as the most ignorant creature in the universe. Social and political power is a composite, and it's a product, not the sum of things necessary to let it come about. And those things include authority and knowledge. Knowledge being conscious information, but that distinction is not particularly important here. And they combine to metamorphose into political and social power. If you don't focus on that when you're looking at political history, or indeed at modern politics, then you're a beginner. You're an amateur. Almost you're one possessed of artificial stupidity. I have seen the most are intelligent, educated and perceptive commentators, unable or unaware of that such a simple distinction. And if you look into the writings from that sociology department at Cambridge, it's littered with that sort of thing. The very principle of oppressor and oppressed is there, because it doesn't consider the significance of information flow or knowledge flow and the nature of authority as opposed to power, and how that wraps round, how information systems, be it relationship systems or even possibly data systems, possibly not so, knowledge systems, they form a pattern. You can actually reveal that pattern, but I won't bore you now how it works. And you know the authority structures. You can give numbers, in a company. Maybe 1 would be someone right at the bottom who sweeps the floor, and maybe 10 is sort of, the CEO or whatever, and all the intervening numbers and authorities. And these two structures wrap around each other like a sort of double helix. And they produce the corporate power necessary for an organisation to exist. Organisations only exist in name on paper without that magical, metamorphic production of corporate power. Oh God, this is so simple, it makes me want to scream. But because of cultural block, people don't seem to understand this. Cambridge then, coming back to that, has a department that is cursed in 2 ways at least. First, by some weird ideology which is intent on the destruction of society, culture and elimination of history. And the second problem it has is methodological, lack of precision, and almost, it's spectacular. Not only do they don't understand the nature of social power, political power, they don't understand it at all. They also can't get their minds around the fact that society in intersubjective, it is in intersubjective, permits or can accommodate incoherent, contradictory and part-formed things, objects. This obviously can't happen under the rules of existence in the physical realm. Society is more sophisticated and more involved than that. But that's quite beyond them. They're fixated with trying to do scientific method, trying to force physical reality onto the unphysical. My God, it's so simple. So the department is cursed in 2 ways. There are other curses too. And something needs to be done about it. Doing nothing isn't an option, because Cambridge will go down in flames if it does nothing about this. And the fuse has been lit. So it has really 3 choices, as I say. First one is to do nothing. And remember, there are hundreds, thousands of people who have degrees in Cambridge, and they're seeing the value of their degrees being hurled onto the bonfire of this spitting arrogance and artificial stupidity from the administration, as well as ideological blindness. That's not a good scene. And of course, there are hundreds of years of history which will disappear. Status will be reduced to that of, a failed polytechnic, a sort of 4th-rate university. And don't forget, this has happened before. Germany was the home of the greatest universities in the world in the 1920s. Spectacularly so. My father, for instance, took a degree, I believe it's in biology, in the 30s. And he had to learn quite a bit of German to be able to be allowed to do that. Of course, along came ideology in the form of those nasty people with horrid emblems on their sleeves and, screeching ideological creatures. I call them creatures because they're still humans, but they were detached from their humanity by the ideology that controlled their thinking. So they were part just creatures, not really human. Even though that humanity was still there, they were divorced from that humanity because ideology had taken over. And ideology's two major objectives remain the same, and that is its survival and its promulgation or spread. Those two come before anything else. So if, in the case of our day, an asset suddenly turns into a liability, well then, even though he's a true believer, he was hurled out of Cambridge because they thought, well, the survival and spread of ideology is now threatened by his presence. However much use he was as a poster boy for how virtuous and how wonderful the whole project was, he has to go. He wasn't removed because of any short, failings on his part, and they were legion. But that wasn't the reason why. And then, of course, a few days later, a week or so, after his death, DEI used him again, turned him into a martyr for the greater good of utopianism, the destruction of society, culture and history, to bring down the evil majority who are supposed to have power unfairly over any minority by definition. But if you dissect what is required for power, which is information authority, you get a different picture. It's much, much more sophisticated and involved than just, systemic bullying and injustice. They do exist, of course, I'm not arguing that. Lack of sophistication really is appalling. So, doing nothing is not an option. Second option is to take up university entirely. There comes a time, as it was with a university I knew very well, where an organisation or department becomes so poisoned, there is no other option but to close it down and shut it, without necessarily admitting it, with the intention of reopening it several years later after the poison has dissipated. This can be done and can be very successful. I know in the case of my university, there's a very good example of that, and it's done very well. That's what a sophisticated administration can do once they realise things have gone too far. So the whole of the university could be closed down. Excuse me, another one might be coming in a moment. Is oddly enough, the pollen's acting very strangely today. So, maybe 4 or 5 years later, opening up again. This would be good for Cambridge because the status is still there, despite being quite badly injured. It's still there. You don't get rid of 500-600 years, whatever it is, of history by one aberration. We can call it aberration now, but it could be called something much more significant if they do nothing. And then it could be resurrected. The status of existing degrees could be maintained, and things could go back on an even keel again. The dangerous academics, in the meantime, could be paid off, told to go away. They can't be tolerated because it's rather like people on a ship who imagine there's some fire going on in the ship, so they think it's a clever thing to open up the cocks and flood it with water. Well, it's insane. You might put the fire out, but it'll sink the boat. That's rather a dramatic approach. I don't think it's going to happen. There are too many people with vested interest here. And it would take remarkable political will to use Cambridge as an example. But the fuse is burning down. So, in the words of Edward VIII, in his short reign, he made a remark that enraged politicians at the time when he went to South Wales and he saw the grotesque poverty and desperation of miners and their families. And he came out with the line, "Something must be done." He was right, of course, but politically it was taken in a very sour and angry way, because the principle of the monarchy in this country is that the monarch gets all the flummery, castles, status and so on and so forth in exchange for keeping her mouth shut, because it's necessary to always back the winners. If you start backing losers, in this case the families in Wales at the time, then you become a loser. The monarch refers to my government. So, logically, Edward VIII was arguing with his government. Well, last time we saw that sort of thing seriously was maybe in the Stuarts in the 17th century. And the principle came down to simply that either you toe the line and always join the winners, or you become a loser and you become an ex-monarch. Well, Edward VIII wasn't thrown out for that, but his general approach and attitude, which was behind those words, did cause his downfall. Not long after that, his affair, his love of Wallis Simpson certainly was a major factor. He was kicked out, replaced by his brother, George VI, who really didn't want the job. He really didn't want it. So, the third option is to close that sociology department and possibly open up again in 10 years' time, or 5-10 years' time. Just close it down and dispense with the academics, pay them off. Because the wider society in the United Kingdom, seeing what's going on there, are beginning to realise that we have an ideological in control of the establishment that wants to destroy the bonds of trust. They want to destroy society. They want to destroy shared culture. And they want to eliminate memory of history. They want to reduce us to fear. So in other words, my little trip to Northumberland would have resulted in a shotgun in my face, rather than cups of tea and general chit-chat and deep gratitude and everyone feeling they'd done their bit. But this destruction is shocking. In Birmingham now, the local authority has made it a criminal offence to put a Union Jack on a lamppost, punishable by 2 years imprisonment. Meanwhile, Palestinian flags fly all over the shop. Now, I'm not arguing the rights and wrongs of the Middle East. I'm not doing that. Because that conflict is no longer, you can't solve it by rationality anymore. The emotions are deeply embedded. And the idea some outsiders can march in there and start saying, well, this is the way you're going to be happy and we're going to... It's just not going to work. One side has a living memory of mechanical mass social murder. And the other side has just a living memory of mass displacement. Well, no, it's still going on now. by people as desperate as them, but in a different way. So the situation can only really be solved on an emotional level, which requires a very different form of negotiation. It's unsophistication, because the way it's being approached now is as unsophisticated as those academics in Cambridge Sociology Department. They are, one is a sort of quasi-jihadist. She makes no secret of it. I'll say one thing about her particular style. Those people are quite upfront about what they plan to do and want to happen. I quite admire that. Don't like it, but I respect it. So, Cambridge has three decisions or possibilities. One, do nothing, which I think will be utterly disastrous. Second, close down the whole university and then open it up again maybe in a couple of years' time. It would do dreadful harm to the students there. Maybe you can close it down over 3 years, so you let the current undergraduate stream come through and then finish that off. And the third one is to just close down that department quickly and decisively and remove all the academics. Oh, and on the way, possibly do a bit of work to establish respect for sociology that it deserves and calls for. The studies society should be the greatest thing after the study of philosophy. Instead, like philosophy, sociology has committed methodological suicide. Well, it seems to be intent on it. It's stuck the knife halfway into it now. It's a form of sort of social harikari. It is spectacularly stupid. It's academic, artificial stupidity on stilts. And meanwhile, the very same people look upon normal people who aren't mentally enslaved as they are, with contempt that's off the scale. Almost an inhuman contempt. That's what I came across years ago, and I've never forgotten it. One particular academic, I'm told, in another university, went even further. He had an Amstrad computer, and he listed the names of female students that he was abusing, giving them marks as to how much he would adjust their finals papers in perverse recognition. In his case, someone broke in and found out what was on that computer, and then he did the indecent thing of putting an end to his life. Academia can accommodate the most shocking people. Now, the sad thing is, there are many excellent academics. They're vastly the majority. But sadly, this small number spoils it for everyone else. It's rather like finding a little bit of dirt in the cake you're eating. Maybe an insect or something, poor insect dying for that. But, Cambridge has that problem. It has to expunge that dirt. Now, I'm not calling the individual academics dirt. I'm talking about the ideology. It has to do something about that. And it has to do it quickly and decisively. Otherwise, it will burn, just like the German universities were burnt in the 1930s. It will go, and its status will be destroyed. And the standing of the UK will then go down to the level of every other country in the world, possibly below it. And we will stand in the ruins of the culture, society and civilization, all because of lack of care and intellectual ignorance. The intelligentsia, the legacy intelligentsia, should be aware, and they're still in the majority of the intelligentsia in this country, that when people go after society, history and culture, the crosswires are pointed, and they're in the crosswires too. Well, that's what Cambridge University has to think about. I have a feeling that it's going to take option 1, which will be a disaster. Option 3 is the most practical and sensible, that is closing down the sociology department, or whatever they call it now, and then reopening it maybe in 5-10 years' time with a better view as to the methodology required to study society, that is to understand the nature of entities and intersubjective, which it doesn't now. It's still fixated by primitive 19th century Victorian determinism and rather weak-minded analytical fixation, epitomised in the likes of Wittgenstein and latter-day philosophers and I wouldn't even call them philosophers, latter academics, who swallowed the idea that culture is somehow not the product of human beings. There's a circularity, you see. If you say everything's bound to be relative because it's influenced by culture and society, you've got to ask yourself, well, where do culture and society come from? Intersubjective agreement with human beings. So culture and society are a product of subjectivity, and yet we're trying to say that they're not, that they influence subjectivity and we are a slave to them, but we made them. So we are slaves unto ourselves, which is the very heart of our ideology, is to enslave us. So we have no mental freedom and no agency. Ideologues like those in the Cambridge Department of Sociology are effectively mentally enslaved. They've given up their agency in the name of extreme religious ideological belief or other ideological beliefs. They're just giving it up. Ade had more agency than most of them. When he said to the garden, "Oh, I thought you would believe me." I mean, he was quite special like that. He wasn't as poisoned as some of the others, particularly that individual in that department who genuinely believes that religious ideology of a certain persuasion, I don't say what, because we live in an age when I could have policemen knocking on the door, should dominate and justify the hatred of democracy, among other things. These are interesting times. Let's hope Cambridge makes the right decision. We'll have to see what happens.